Horizon Zero Dawn has had a patched release for it last Thursday during the end of Gamescom, which unlocks the game's frame rate up to 60 FPS on PlayStation 5 through backwards compatibility mode. To talk about the ins and outs of this simple patch, here I'm joined by John Linneman. How you doing there, John?
I'm doing very well, Alex, and of course, I'm actually here less to discuss it with you and more ask you questions about it because I haven't actually tried it myself, so I'm kind of curious. You're the one doing the heavy lifting on this project, so we thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. The reason why I'm taking over this project is because John's doing other things, but also because I had an experience last year with the PC version through multiple videos where we found out very quickly unlocking Horizon Zero Dawn up to 60 FPS was not the easiest thing on earth because the game was designed primarily around 30 FPS initially on the PlayStation 4. So it requires actually quite a bit of engineering effort to get the game running at a nice 60 FPS, both in terms of performance to a certain degree, as well as in terms of, I would just say, I don't know, how good it looks at 60. There's a lot of things that get in the way. But
all right. Well, let's start with this then. So basically, before we get into some of the details, like what's the basics here? Like, what does this patch actually do?
It's pretty simple, John. On PlayStation 5, it unlocks the frame rate up to 60 FPS. It's using backwards compatibility mode, so with all of the limitations that has in terms of how it can change the game, it eliminates the resolution and performance mode options that the PlayStation 4 Pro version had, and just essentially runs the game in the entire time in that resolution mode, which was checkerboard 4K back then and checkerboard 4K now.
Okay, so it's basically like a lot of the other patches we've seen, where it's basically just bumping the frame rate up. But as you said,
it's exactly that.
There's most likely more challenges behind this one due to the nature of it on PC. So I guess the big question people are going to want to know then is, how does it actually perform? Does it really get to does it actually get to 60 stable, or what's going on here?
You know, it's having such a hard time. Of course not. No, it's running magnificently. This game, I mean, if we just think about what the PlayStation 4 Pro is in comparison to the PS5 GPU, even if it's slightly limited by backwards compatibility mode, we know that the PlayStation 5 GPU can just run circles around the PS4 Pro one, definitely more than 2 times as powerful, and that shows out in the performance footage where I did the intro section, as well as running through the open world and Meridian, try and find spots and areas where I knew the original PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro version had issues, and I essentially found no issues. However many thousands of frames that were recorded, I only saw one actual drop. It's in the initial cutscene, so like in the first 3 or 4 minutes of the game, essentially. It's an area where I knew on PC where it's pretty hard on the GPU. And it's also an area where the PlayStation 4 Pro dips into like the low 20s. So it's like slightly dips into 50 FPS for this one moment, but then the rest of the entire play, all the rest of the cutscenes I recorded, all perfect, flawless 60 FPS. Technically, I mean, that one cutscene does show maybe there's chance for other drops throughout the entire, there's a variety of gameplay experiences you can play here that it did not have. But, maybe there's a chance for that, but it's so low that I didn't record it, and it's probably not important to even, talk about if it does show up.
So pretty basic then. So it basically does what it says in the tin, which is good.
Yeah, it does exactly what it says.
But what about some of the other issues that when you looked at the PC version, there was some things that you kind of noticed, especially running at higher frame rates. What's the situation there?
So I'd say this is kind of the area where it's most like the PC version is now. I'm presuming they, did a lot of the code changes from that PC version and brought them onto the PlayStation 5 version for this patch. So a lot of the issues that this game had at launch on PC regarding how 60 FPS animations looked and things like that, I'd say most of those are gone. But at the same time, it still has some of the weird stuff that the game just inherently has because it wasn't designed around 60 FPS. So like between camera cuts, you can definitely see some weird stuff happening, like just like floating things, or
it always had that though, like even on PS4 Pro.
It always had that, there's just weird stuff like that. There's one area though where I thought there's an area where the PC version had a patch that got rid of alloy flying in one cutscene, but curiously it's still in the PlayStation 5 version. Maybe that's just a tiny oversight.
Wait, so you can't fly anymore?
You can't fly anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, that's about it. Another thing I noticed too is that the PlayStation 5 version has you won't see it in the footage I'm presenting to you right here because I've tried to line up the footage so it looks good on YouTube, but the PlayStation 5 version uses a different cutscene transition timing than both PC and PS4 Pro. So the PlayStation 5 version will always end a cutscene a few frames earlier than the PlayStation 4 Pro or PC.
I think that's most interesting for anybody that edits YouTube videos, because what that means is normally if you have two cutscenes from two different versions, you put them side by side, they usually just line right up. But because of the timing here, it just means that when the camera cuts on one version, it cuts at a slightly different time on the other version, which it doesn't matter to the end user. You don't really see any difference. It's just for actually editing, it's a little bit annoying. But okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's essentially it.
I'd love to know the reason behind that, but there's really no reason to, or there's really no
Maybe
way
they
to
thought
know
it looks
for
better
sure.
for some reason.
I'm just surprised like that it was adjusted at all. But okay. So it's 60 FPS.
Mm-hmm.
It looks the same. What about, is there any other bonuses? Like, for instance, loading? Because if I recall, PS4 Pro was like upwards of a minute or something to start. So what about PS5?
Yeah, loading up the game, a cold boot, new campaign, about 1 minute on PlayStation 4 Pro. On PS5, it's cut in half, which I think is good because we've seen sometimes backwards compatibility titles not even helping loading times, or even sometimes like, it doesn't really do much of anything. So you get a nice decrease in loading times by half or so on PlayStation 5. It's not as high as it could go because we're obviously limited by BC here. So
the big test will be Horizon 2, I think, where we'll actually be able to compare the last gen and the current gen and see what it loads.
That one I imagine will have like 2-second loading times, if anything at all, to fit in with the theme of what PlayStation 5 is. Another cool loading thing is that on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro, when you run around Meridian or just any of the really dense areas of the game and you'd move quickly, you'd have this issue where textures and objects that were being streamed in would come in, but they'd come in late always. So you could run up to an object and you'd see the texture like flash in like half a second later, or run up to an object and see the object just fade into the scene a half a second later. That was an issue that happened on those machines, but PlayStation 5, I'm presuming due to backwards compatibility, having some access to that SSD speed, well, it just doesn't have any of that at all. So it's pretty great. And the last thing, I think this is a little hard to show on YouTube, but I think the higher frame rate in general, doubling it over PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro, helps the checkerboard rendering that the game uses to look a little bit more competent. It is essentially like the frames are closer together, so I think checkerboard rendering here looks better. And if you like zoom into, I don't know, this.
Wait! Did you just zoom in?
I just zoomed in.
Oh no!
I think it's about 400%. Oh no!
Gotta think of those phone screens, man.
Gotta think of those phones. So it does look better, I think, too, even though it's just marginal.
Well, I mean, it makes sense logically. I mean, for people that are trying to grasp what you're talking about, I mean, think of an object like an arm moving across the screen at 60 frames per second. If you look at each frame, the arm will move less with each frame because there's more frames, right? If you move at 30, it moves a larger distance, and because the way the image reconstruction works, and this is honestly true with many different anti-aliasing solutions that use previous frame data, just having more frames closer together means better end results because it's just more info to build the frame from. So
for sure,
you want that higher frame rate. It looks better. It's less blurry and a bit sharper, so that's nice. Cool.
That's
all right. So are there any actual issues then?
No, there's no real issues with this. It's the same game you played on PlayStation 4 Pro back then, now running at a higher frame rate with, lower load times and slightly better image quality, which is the only issue. And that's a weird thing to say. The only issue is that there wasn't more time invested in this patch to, add in some smaller things.
Sure.
Like the game's anisotropic filtering is still just like the PlayStation 4 Pro version. So it's not very good in that aspect, or like the LOD range is limited by that exact same thing we saw in the PlayStation 4 Pro version. So it's pretty low, it's pretty aggressive, but in the end, I think when you're playing this, if you're going back to play it again, or you're new to Horizon Zero Dawn, this is an excellent upgrade, a simple one at that, but a good one. And it's nice to see always these PlayStation 5 patches come out.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of breathing new life into an old game, which is, that's kind of what this generation of backwards compatibility offers. I mean, stuff like FPS boost on the Xbox and then bespoke patches for PS5. Yep. This is great stuff, and I'm glad to see that we're seeing it this time around.
Yeah, I'm too. Well, John, I think that's essentially all we can really say about this rather simple patch. Awesome 60 FPS, nice little upgrade. But yeah, that's about it. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I'm happy to join you for this, and I'll be curious to see Horizon 2, I guess. Do we know if that's coming to the PC?
I don't know yet. Maybe we'll find out in a few years.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, if you did like this video, please hit that like button to subscribe to the channel. If you did find it informative, well, please look in that little corner there and hit that little bell button, which will give you instant notifications when Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out and see more videos like this, well, support us on Patreon to get years worth of our content in high quality for download. And if you want to talk to John or myself about this, well, you can always write to us on Twitter. And this is going to be Alex saying Auf Wiedersehen und...
Yeah.